You mentioned the Sunday Times, and I will be provocative in saying we should all look at this Sunday Times, because our good friend Valdemar Janacek, who does fantastic documentaries about the arts, etc., has written a review of the exhibition Comics Unmasked over 2 pages, which is great. But there might be a need of balance.
Yes, so get tweets in.
Yeah, have a look at that. I mean, we don't know what it's going to say quite yet, but we gather it's going to need some. It may cause an interest. Actually, we want to cause a bit of a story. We don't want just to be. We all got comics and it's all we won the back, because we really haven't.
Tori and I got a crash course walking through the show backwards just now, which was a complete delight, seeing the stuff there and seeing how well comics in England fit into both the literary and the artistic English traditions. I mean, you know, I get very puzzled when people say, well, of course, you know, books for adults never have illustrations. And you know, well, Dickens always did.
Exactly.
It was intrinsic. In fact, it was one of the things that set the tone of Dickens. You knew if you were in a comedic or a serious, and Dickens began his career commissioned.
Why do you think we have this huge schism within, to say that pictures and words really shouldn't be mixing and shouldn't be cavorting with each other on the page?
Do you think that's collapsing slightly with a modern culture which is much more visually led, and it becomes more, I don't know, I almost feel like comics should be coming more and more into their own now, and I think they are in a way. You know, the kids are reading them on tablets and phones, and I just don't think there's that same baseline sort of judgment. You know, they're playing, gaming is in the same breath as filmmaking, is in the same breath as TV. I don't know that there's still those divisions.
I think the divisions between media exist. I think the ideas of what constitute valid media and why are slowly breaking down as you get a generation that is absolutely prepared to say that that's bullshit. And you know, I remember being, I think I was about 11 years old, and it was the first time I actually had the nerve to challenge a teacher. And I took my English teacher aside, and I said, look, okay, you have to explain this thing to me. Why are comics banned? If we bring comics in, they'll get confiscated. I would love to lend some of my friends my comics and talk comics, but we can't. And he said, well, it's obvious, Gaiman. You see, the thing is, if you, Gaiman, it's obvious because it's like, it's rubbish. You know, if you read comics, you won't read real literature. I said, hang on, I'm the only kid in this school who has read the school library. I've read it, and I love comics, and that's obviously not true. And expecting him to say, but you don't understand, and to paint something to make me understand. And he harumphed and walked away, and I realized that it didn't explain. It was one of those things where...
But that's a really key moment for you, and it's funny, because when we're talking to Dave Gibbons, who obviously drew Watchmen for Alan Moore and was his collaborator, he said that his big light bulb moment was when he went to school, and the kids' comic books were confiscated and burned in the schoolyard. And when he saw that happening, he thought, this is a massively important medium, and how do I sign up?
He said, if you don't like comics, I do.
Yeah.
Basically, he decided that.
That was definitely for me at that point. It was also the first point that I realized that the adult world was wrong. Up until that point, you know, adults would do things, and you kind of take it on trust. Well, it's your job to tell me true things, so I'm assuming that what you're saying is probably true or true-ish. And it was the first time that I actually got to measure up what I was being told against my experience and what I knew, and go, this is not true.
And a lot of your work, I think, references literature, and you interchange very, very easily. I mean, I think your comics, I don't know whether you're doing it consciously, but you have a very literary bent in your comic book output as well. Was that something that was conscious, that you felt you wanted to fight that corner? Because I have to say, funny enough, with this show, the reason I initially approached the British Library and basically that we decided to do this was because it felt like of all the cultural institutes, this would be the best one, because it would unpack that side of storytelling, because it's one of those funny things that people don't necessarily understand the process of making comic books. And having written comic books myself, when you say that to somebody, they always say, does that mean that you sort of, somebody hands you a page and then you write some words out? You know, I mean,
fill in the balloons or something.
no, actually it does have to be written first, and that, you know, so it's Jesus. But, you know, so that was quite a conscious decision. Was that something that you felt that you wanted to address with your work, or was that just a natural process?
I don't ever remember going, I think I'm going to be literate. I remember an awful lot of, I think I'll write the next panel, and I want this to be interesting.
Yeah.
But I also thought...
Sorry, it was important when you did Violent Kiss to the key thing was that on the back of it, it didn't say superheroes or whatever, or comics, it said general fiction. Do you remember that?
I remember.
You were so happy about that, because that's the point. There's all these other kinds of storytelling that don't sit in these, trapped in these little genre formulas.
It was, what was important for us with Violent Cases was having a comic that we could show people. Where, because what was frustrating for me is that I would show people Mouse or Dark Knight or Watchmen, and they'd say, well, it's superheroes, or it's Batman, or it's mice and cats. And you're going, well, okay, then let's make a comic that you know, has, to the best of my, whatever I was, 26-year-old ability, has all of the values of mainstream fiction. It will get drawn by Dave with all the power of 23-year-old Dave McKean just finishing art college. And we will take it out to the world. And Dave's dedication was something like, you know, to my teacher Rowley, look, this is what we meant by comics. Because he'd been having that argument too. He'd show people comics, and they couldn't see what we saw. We saw the potential, and we were perfectly willing. You know, I remember with Watchmen, Alan Moore showing me the black and whites of Watchmen, and not knowing what this was, but just reading it and going, okay, everything's changed. This is. There was a line in the sand before this comic, and now I'm reading this.
But it was such a special moment, though, that all of you were working in that time. What do you think created that? I mean, looking at this show, one of the things that I'd suggest maybe is that for the first time there were quite a lot of regular weekly comics that were starting to support more interesting material. But there was still this massive leap that you all made. What do you think?
I think the biggest thing was you had a bunch of particularly writers who had grown up loving comics as kids and teenagers, outgrowing comics in the sense that there wasn't anything around for us by the time we were 16 or 17, but believing that there should be, and then going off and reading everything else, and coming back to comics in our 20s, having read all the novels, having, what I thought was most interesting is when you get me and Grant Morrison together, or me and Alan Moore, or me and Jamie Delano, or any of the Pete Million, we weren't talking superhero comics. We probably weren't talking comics very much, apart from the fact that we would occasionally talk, you know, travails with artists. But mostly, what we would be talking was interesting poets we discovered, interesting writers. I remember giving Ian Sinclair to Alan Moore and saying, I think you should read his stuff, I think this is interesting. That Grant Morrison gave me Lucy, oh my God, what's her name? The New Mother. Anybody out here know who wrote? Say it loudly if you know. I'm just blank. Friend of Henry James's, wrote Lucy Clifford. Wrote the strangest, most peculiar, rule-breaking, odd, disturbing Victorian children's fiction. And one of her stories was a story called The New Mother. And Grant Morrison had discovered this book called Anyhow Stories. And I just remember him sort of telling me the plot of the new mother about how these two children named Blue Eyes and Turkey run into this wild child in the village who has an instrument called a pear drum, a musical instrument, and she explains to them that if they look inside, they'll see little people dancing. And when she plays the instrument, and they say, well, will you do it for us? And she says, I'll do it, but you have to go home and be naughty first. So they go home and they're naughty. But then mother says to them, you can't do this. You can't be wild children. You have to be wild children. If you're wild, then I will have to go away. And your new mother will come with her glass eyes and her wooden tail. But the children do not listen, and they go back, and the wild child in the village square says, no, you have to be more naughty, and finally you'll get to see it. They go back, and they're naughty, and this happens a couple of times, and finally they go home, and their mother's packing. And she says, I'm sorry, I have to go now. And she leaves. And then they hear, coming down the road from far away, the swish, swish of the wooden tail of their new mother as she approaches, and they see the setting sun glinting on her glass eyes, and they run off into the forest where they live. And the new mother moves into their house, and sometimes they peek through the door. And you know, if anything inspired Coraline, it was just the realization that, okay, you know, Victorian writers for children could do that shit.
Well, I'm showing you that wonderful this revenge comic we've got in the exhibition, which is just like a nightmare, where this girl's been maltreating her dolls, and they come to life and do the same thing to her and hammer nails into her head and cut her hair up. And fantastic stuff. It's all that kind of cautionary tale. It's meant to make kids behave. It has a kind of, in theory, a message of being, actually, you should behave. It's not. Is it subversive, that story? Or is it actually saying you should behave, otherwise you'll end up with this terrible situation?
I think it has this glorious surface of we are telling you a cautionary tale for your own good, behave or your parents will go away.
Yes.
But actually what it says is the world is fucked up and weird and cannot be understood or comprehended, and there are pear drums that may or may not exist, and ugly mothers and new mothers, and your mother may leave. and which I think is a much more interesting sort of version of reality.
I think we might want to invite our other guests. Yeah, okay, I think so.
Why don't you put Tori next to me and move
I
up there?
Could we please welcome Tori Amos?